Okay, good morning, everyone. Everyone here in the room and everyone who's at home. My name is Kent Fitzsimons. I'm an associate professor here at the at ENSAP Bordeaux, where I teach architecture theory and design. I'm also a member of the PAVE Research Laboratory, which is in English Profession, Architecture, City, Environment, which is a lab that crosses human sciences, social sciences, and architecture to understand how we live in the built environment, like a lot of us do in the room, I think. So I'll be presenting this morning the session of Schools of Excellence, and I'll be presenting the two presenters, Zhang and Christophe GIROT. I was thinking about this that after yesterday's presentations, we had two great presentations, and it's a great idea. I have to commend Carlos and the IFU for this idea, because we get access to the kitchen, in a way, the back office of these schools, where there are recipes that are tested, that are adapted, that are perfected. It's a rare opportunity for those of us, and I think that many of us in the room are like that, who are interested not only in pedagogy and the actions, but who are interested in program building and even institution building. So it's a great opportunity, especially since the examples are from highly successful members of the IFU. So after yesterday, we had these stimulating presentations from Machiel from Delft and from Zhang from the National University of Singapore. And while I was preparing to introduce this, the third and fourth presentations, it occurred to me that, we were talking about schools of excellence and we saw some rankings. It occurred to me we could play our own little bit of game of ranking our guests, these four presenters. But before you are worried, get worried, the four colleagues, I assure you, I'm not talking about ranking you, first place, second place, and so on. Although since MIT isn't here, maybe Delft would have a chance. It could be a good thing. No, I'm talking something more original. We're in Bordeaux, a great wine region. We could maybe use wine categories to rank these presentations. We could talk about the premier cru supérieur, des premiers crus, second cru, Bordeaux supérieur, groupe bourgeois. We could do that. And I suggest that we do that this evening, maybe with the help of some hands-on tasting, so that we can do some benchmarking with some local wines, maybe at the dinner tonight. Anyway, with that, in any case, I'm sure that none of our guests, we saw it yesterday, and I'm sure that this morning we'll see, none of the presenters of these excellent schools could be qualified as mere table wine. We're definitely talking about the upper rankings of the wine. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the first speaker of this session of Schools of Excellence, Zhang. So Li is the Dean of the School of Architecture at Tsinghua University. I'm sorry for my pronunciation. I don't speak too many languages. And he is, of course, also professor of architecture at the school. He's the vice principal of THADI, which I understood is the Architectural Design and Research Institute of Tsinghua University. He founded the award-winning lab Team Minus in the context of this institute. In 2021, he was elected to the Hall of National Masters in Survey, Engineering, and Design in China. He is currently a council member of the International Union of Architects, the UIA, and a standing board member of the Architectural Society of China, editor-in-chief of the leading Chinese magazine World Architecture. So Zhang Li is the founder and main advocate of urban ergonomics, an interdisciplinary domain that focuses on human body and space and the design of active urban spaces. His design work covers a wide range of scales, from urban design to buildings and to microcosm interventions. With T-, he's won over 30 national and international awards in the past decade alone. He's currently the architecture-in-chief of a number of development zones, the Zhang Jiaku zone and the Shugang Big Air zone, which are both for the Beijing 2022 Olympic Winter Games, which I think actually already happened. And to end this introduction where we are learning about the great accomplishments of our guest. He was the curator of the Chinese pavilion for the Venice Biennale in 2020, which ended up being in 2021. So please join me in welcoming Li Zhang, who will speak to us about his program at the Tsinghua University.
Thank you very much for this wonderful introduction. I don't think neither me nor my school would deserve some of the words used. Probably the best thing we can compare to a drinkable material would be a cup of Coke. So I'm going to share my screen, and basically it's about the approach currently being taken in Tsinghua. I can see it's being projected on the screen show in the conference room show. It should work. I would say we have already passed an era of where these kind of planned programs, or there is a gigantic structure for everything. We have lost that because currently it is basically the professors focusing on different fields and grouping together, focusing on some shared interest in some subjects. And so we do see this kind of bubbling of professors and labs and interests of our professors and students. To put it honestly, we are facing a crisis now in this discipline of architecture. At least in China, we have passed that time of rapid urbanization. So simply trying to do some building is no longer an issue. And that's why people are looking. Actually, this increases the curiosity, and this increases the opportunity of looking for new areas and for exploration and adventure. And what I'm going to report to you now is 10 questions being currently asked again and again by our professors and students, and focusing in different fields. If I may, well, I don't know why it always advances automatically to the last slide. But anyway, we would somehow put all these 10 questions in this map. And in the vertical axis, you have the traditional scales of architecture, from the very big, the macro, and probably the wilderness, and nature, and all the way down to our body, and even inside our body, the inner systems and working systems, neurosystems and viscerals inside our body. And then on the horizontal axis, you have two ends of this process of architecture. One end is the object end, is the production end, or the supply. And the other end is closer to what we need, is the demand and our judgments. If we put all these questions on this map, we do see their locations and distributions. Of course, it might not be a surprise that right at the crossing of these two axes and is the traditional, where traditional architecture, the focus of traditional architecture is the making of buildings. The first question being asked mostly by our landscape professors, and currently joined by professors from both architecture and urban studies, is on the rewilding of some part of our cities, of some of the built spaces, and also this kind of sorting out of ecological assets that are currently existing around us in rural and also in urban China. This can be seen as an intersection between the traditional landscape architecture department and other schools in our university, such as the schools for biology, the schools for environmental studies. And the second question being asked is related closely to energy. let's face it, that's the elephant in the room. That talking about carbon neutrality and net zero, simply doing beautiful things in architecture is not enough. We have to rethink, almost doing kind of upheaval, disruptive kind of change, and to the basic infrastructure of our cities, of the man-made structures and dwellings. And so we have incorporated an entire department related to energy into our school. And they are currently working with the energy department of our university, and also environmental studies and other related departments on the regional and the urban energy infrastructures. Traditionally, this is not a topic for architecture and urban studies, but now it is very hardcore energy studies. The third question currently being asked, interestingly, related to this long agricultural civilization in China, is productive urban landscaping. How to revitalize the traditional wisdom of somehow sharing the urban space with both production and consumption in terms of food. This can be seen as an intersection between architecture, landscape, and agriculture. And interestingly, also health studies, because there are professors testing out plants and urban vegetations that has a healing effect. Traditional Chinese herbal medicine might be of some use here. And the fourth question, I believe, should have been shared by all the schools currently across the world, is the computational urban studies. Traditionally, the urban studies would be built upon the data that has been collected by traditional interview or site survey kind of methodology, but today is more built upon the body of data that is being produced everywhere, and also processed through computer science. And by the way, the School of Computer Science currently in our university is the most popular school. We can't compete with them when we try to attract graduates from high schools. But we can find common interests and all this kind of mutual benefiting kind of collaboration between the School of Computer Science and the School of Architecture in our university. The fifth question, including some very experimental programs by our professors and by some of our laboratories, is trying to stay as far away from what we are having now in our urban setup as possible. Is this self-sustained habitats? Can we regenerate or redefine that kind of habitat given in today's contemporary context? It can be a rural community, it can be a remote community in unhabitat or uninhabited areas. And some professors even are working on possibly a future extraterrestrial kind of habitats. They are working with a lot of different schools as well, from the School of Anthropology to the School of Space Studies. And the sixth question, it has been a long time since this question was being noticed, and it has been developed quite fast recently because the general Chinese rethinking about our urbanization. We have been focusing too much on quantity rather than quality. So we are finding buildings that has been constructed about half a century or even longer ago, even earlier. They can be easily reused. But relatively new buildings built in the last 20 to 30 years, they are pretty hard to update, to reuse, or try to make them adapt to today's changes. And that's why this data-driven programming and POE, post-occupation evaluation, is currently a very noticeable topic for architecture studies in China. Is rethinking what we have been conceptualizing and before the making of building, and also testing out how our original ideas are being tested in the real use of the real world use of today. Interestingly, we have a lot of historical legacies and heritages, including a number of heritage sites all around China. But currently, even those people who are studying historical preservation, they're turning to new technologies. The computational preservation is currently a hot topic among that group of people. And the eighth question is again on the low carbon, low energy consumption way of making buildings. This can be a traditional topic, but in today's context is more focused on carbon neutrality rather than traditional green idea. Is more focused on the carbon footprint of life happening inside the building, and also the carbon footprint of the building life cycle itself. And the ninth topic is what our dear host has just mentioned, is urban ergonomics. Is trying to go a little bit further than what Jan Gale and Kevin Lynch and people like them have been doing, is to use all these measurable data, in particular the ergonomic data and ergonomic analysis, and trying to expand the idea of ergonomics to our cities, to treat the city as a bigger mechanism and it reacts to our human body. And the last question, which is focused rather on the inside of our bodies, and this is heavily linked with computer science, actually, and there is one Tsinghua professor who is currently working with our school, is right on the topic of how our cognition and our aesthetic judgment about the built space is being processed here in the brain, and they try to use some kind of AI simulation, try to decipher that process with a little bit of success, but overall it is not deciphered yet. So there's virtual space aesthetics studies. So all these questions, if you put them together, you do see they are grouped or scattered along the diagonal from the upper left to the bottom right, which also shows the traditional architecture. In traditional architecture, the bigger the scale, the further away you are from this kind of subjective judgment, and more to the objective laws of physics, laws of production. We are asking these questions, and professors and students, they are forming clusters and working on issues in these fields, and they do generate a lot of contribution to our redefining of our programs. We do a update of our program every 2 years or 3 years. Fortunately, we currently in China, we still have a lot of real world projects going on, but no longer as this kind of Chinese bigness, rapid urbanization. On the contrary, it is currently focused on 3 spaces. And the first kind of space is the rural. And the second is the spaces that probably hasn't been thought over before, less built interstitial spaces, or the redefining of existing fabrics, or underground spaces. The third space, of course, I believe everyone is talking about this space today, with or without doubt, is the virtual space. And thanks to those gigantic tech firms around the world, they're making them very popular today. And what can architects do, or what can these spaces do? Are they replacing our real world space, or are they simply duplications, or are they simply just another fantasy? It's still yet to be seen, but people are getting more and more interested about this topic, and a lot of students and professors are also trying to work in this space. That's what I have to share today. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that very clear and concise presentation. I suggest that we continue with the second presentation and then have questions after, unless there are questions right now to clarify, if there are points of clarification, if you want to ask Professor Zhang some questions. No? Okay, so I'll introduce Christophe GIROT. Thank you very much, Professor Zhang. There will surely be questions after we're able to process the fantastic information. So our second presenter is Christophe GIROT, who is the chair of the landscape architecture, chair of landscape architecture at the Department of Architecture at the ETH, the Technical University in Zurich, where he's been since 2001. He is professor at this university. Christophe GIROT has directed the Institute of Landscape Architecture since 2005 and received the ETH Golden Owl Award for Teaching Excellence in 2016. His research covers 3 domains. The first, methods in landscape architecture and topology. The second is new media in landscape analysis and perception. And the third is the history and theory of Western landscape architecture. In his chair at the ETH in Zurich, Christophe GIROT puts emphasis on the large-scale landscape design and modeling methods, with particular attention to the topology of nature in and around cities. The Laboratory Landscape Visualization Modeling Lab in ETH, and ongoing research in digital fabrication with the Kyoto Institute of Technology, and with grants from CTI and SNF. All this work has yielded groundbreaking results in point cloud design, modeling, and acoustic sensing. Christophe GIROT received a double master's degree of architecture and landscape architecture from University of California, Berkeley, which is a little place some of you may have heard of near San Francisco. And before that, he received a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Planning from University of California at the Davis campus. He was professor and chair of landscape architecture at the Versailles School of Landscape Architecture in France between 1990 and 2000, until he joined the ETH. And finally, Christophe GIROT has a practice in Zurich with projects in Europe and in Asia. And with that, I'd like to welcome Christophe GIROT. Christophe, do you have a presentation to share, or?
Yes, if you allow me to share the screen, I'll do that. Thank you. Thank you, Ken, for the introduction.
You're very welcome. Normally, I gave you the rights to share. Do you have it on your interface?
We will see. I think it should work.
Yeah,
I'm not sure. Are you seeing this?
We're seeing something here. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So I just wanted to add one point. I'm very bad at rewriting my CV, but I was actually Dean of the Department of Architecture for the past 4 years. Currently, the Dean is Professor Tom Emerson. And I just wanted to show you the governance of the school. The ETH is actually a public school in Switzerland, very selective school. And we work really in a way in combination with the Swiss Confederation, both inland and outland, to develop knowledge and to consolidate the field of architecture and environmental studies. So the executive board is composed of 4 people. We have a director of research, Professor Mosayebi. We have a deputy dean, that is to say the deans actually rotate very quickly in our system. It's a very Swiss democratic system. Deans only stay on for 4 years and they overlap for 2 years. So that's the way the whole system works, governance. And then we have Martin Delbecq, who's a director of studies. Basically, we're roughly 2,000 students at the school right now. As you can tell, the big half is bachelor. We have then the last, say, third is master students. And then we have doctoral students and visitors in continuing education. In terms of the spread of fields of knowledge, I'm not going to show an exhaustive program as Zhang did it. I'm just going to show very specific programs here and actually represent the Future Cities Laboratory. But I just wanted to say that we have a very strong design department. It's roughly half the faculty are architects in practice. They are allowed to practice. They're actually required to practice and keep a foot in the real world and go back to teaching and theory. Then we have a strong technology and architecture department, which has developed the field of robotics lately. It's been a very successful NCCR project. And then the traditional history and theory with next to it urban and landscape studies that are developing, as well as conservation and construction history. So I'm here really to show you one stream of research that we're doing at the ETH, which is very interdisciplinary. It's called the Future Cities Laboratory, which is something that we developed together with Singapore already back 12 years ago. I was there at the beginning. I started in 2012 in Singapore. We were working narrowly with NUS and other colleagues. And the goal was actually to really develop missions through science by design and always located in place. And the idea that was begun at the time was for Singapore and Zurich to have symmetrical hubs with equivalent research modules on either side and a sort of engagement platform with, of course, the projects not being located only in Switzerland or in Singapore, but actually being spread out over the planet in a way. So the discussion right now, as you know, with this major ecological crisis that we're all experiencing, named climate change, not to mention the economic and energy crisis that have also started to loom. The whole discourse right now is about the circular economy, working on local flows, local materials, creating a so-called bioregion. I mean, all the catchwords are there. However, the gap between the theory and the practice, the reality of terrain, is actually quite huge right now. And therefore, the current program that we have at the hub in Zurich is based on basically 4 main topics. One is cycles and districts, where we have circular future cities, dense and green cities, urban biocycles. We also have infrastructure and ecology with the sea-city interface. I mean, of course, you all know there's not much of a seacoast in Switzerland, but we work in different regions on that topic. Food and territories. Food is becoming a very, very burning topic right now, and I'll go into depth on one particular project that I'm involved with right after. And then, of course, this whole notion of integration and strategies, which is going back to how, even in this digital age, how do we actually communicate between fields of knowledge? How do they work in a way computationally? The catchword today is computational knowledge. It's the ability for machines and artificial intelligence to synthesize decisions and overlap themes in order to increase resource efficiency and in general efficiency, right? So I'm just showing you very briefly what we have in that current program. So the cycles and district, these modules are focused on material processes, digital fabrication, energy generation, reuse, and are involved in what we would call sustainable construction and habitation of high density settlement and city district scales. The idea of densification of the urban fabric, preservation of the rural hinterland is of prime priority. The whole approach to energy design and architecture has been sort of toppled over in the last 10 years. You know, we've gone from a big styrofoam pullover, a lot of petroleum products, to a very different approach to energy use in buildings through passive ventilation, et cetera. I won't go into the details of that, but this is the sort of focus that we're having in that field. The other one is about infrastructures and ecologies, where here you see just a picture of the sea-city interface. As you all know, the rising waters are a reality right now. So in this cluster, the research works on connective tissues of settlement systems, transport corridors, waterways, and their edges, right? And it's those edges, whether they're natural or not, that affect directly the city function and the city scale, right? Then we have what we call integration strategies. These are modules that work and develop innovative cyber physical design processes, cognitive, digitally enhanced, AI, AR, VR, etc. Patterns and functions of settlement systems may be arranged. And this is also done a lot in collaboration with the computer science department at ETH. I mean, as Zhang said, those programmers and scripters are in very high demand in actually all fields right now. And the last module is called Food and Territories. This is the one in which I'm also involved, and I'll just show you a very quick glimpse on what the intention is there. So these models focus on the emergent edge city and hinterland regions to integrate local food production, water management, ecosystem services, hybrid land uses, and biodiversity and sustainable extended urbanization. And the project that I'm working on together with a colleague from the engineering department, Professor Adrien Guerre-Regame, is on resilient blue-green infrastructures. And we've chosen to work in what we call the global south, in one of the poorest countries in the world, Madagascar. Just for your information, Madagascar has over 30 million inhabitants, still doesn't have an architecture school there. The architects go back to the old colonial countries like France to get their degrees and come back, which is not the optimal solution. We're actually working with the IST, the engineering school that is located in Antananarivo in Madagascar. And we've been pushing a LiDAR-based method, which is what we've been developing throughout the years here at the ETH with the LVML lab. And what the LiDAR approach does, and we've got very good data on that, it gives you extremely precise geographic information, topographic information. You're able to monitor the fields. So what we're seeing here in green are actually the big rice fields and agricultural fields in the immediate vicinity of the city. And what we think is important here is to transfer, in a way to try and really transfer this knowledge base. And we're actually working on workshops this coming autumn between the students at the IST in Antananarivo and the ETH to transfer part of this knowledge system over. Because in a way, one could say that the conceptual revolution, I think, that architecture is experiencing right now is that all of a sudden we've gone from a period of, in a way, tabula rasa design, you know, the architect designing on a white sheet of paper and erasing the entire terrain or the entire reality of a place in order to build a new building. Here, we could almost say that with the LiDAR, it's the logic of the terrain. It's the logic of the given terrain, the productivity of the terrain, the wealth of the existing land that dictates the form of the architecture. You know, in a way, what we're trying to say is through these analysis, and we've just taken 3 fields in the immediate vicinity of Antananarivo. Here you see the main town center here with the hill, the palace of the kings up here. And these 3 fields, which are still highly agricultural, very close to the urban sprawl area, are highly productive. Just to remind you, Madagascar is one of the poorest countries in the world. It's in one of the 10 poorest countries in the world. We have roughly $1 revenue per day in that country, $1 per person. And the food production there is essential. I mean, there are almost no functional roads in that island. And what we have is a place where the local production is feeding the city. Very, very important place. And in a way, ironically, they're ahead of the game. They're working in Madagascar on absolutely local production for obvious reasons, but they're actually much further ahead of the game in that respect, providing food for the immediate urban context than we are. Therefore, I think that we can learn from both sides. We can come in with our LiDAR technique and analysis technique, and I'm just going to show you how we do that. We do depth map analysis. There's a real problem that's happening right now where the productive rice fields get, in a way, plundered for bricks. They take the subsoil to produce bricks. Bricks produce cash. They're the basic building material. And the problem that you see in this drawing on the right is whatever appears deep blue is where the earth has been dug so deep that not only is there no more clay, there's peat coming up, but actually you can't grow any more rice. It's finished, right? And therefore, the intervention is a sort of preventive intervention, mapping all the information that's on the LiDAR. And we have very good mapping here. This is actually the view of the whole city in the background. And these are the fields in the front with the dikes, the levees, which were built not only by the colonial powers, but actually by the Mirana kingdom 500 years ago. It's a very, very, very elaborate system, sort of handmade landscape, where in a way, the food for the city is produced right in front of its door. And what's interesting with this technique is we can really work in geopositioned information, 3-dimensional, the LiDAR technique, and transferring this knowledge to Madagascar, to the global south. The students in this IST school are very well trained in mathematics and physics, and they have everything they need to compete with other students in the world. The only thing they miss is a laptop, right? So what I'm trying to say, and it's not out of charity, I'm just saying that the engagement of the ETH is not just to make Switzerland even better and even richer all the time. It's actually also to contribute to the world in general with sort of advanced technical solutions. So here you see a close-up of our LiDAR model, the scans that we've done also on site, where you see these sort of very complicated water passages, drainage systems between the fields. And in a way, there's a lot of work both on defining the urban fringe, because we can't ignore the urbanization. We have to give the rules of urbanization by using water as a system of limits. And what you see here, this is the last map I'm showing you. Here again, you have our 3 parcels, this one, that one, and this one, that are actually going to be developed this autumn with different solutions. The idea is to maintain, of course, a highly productive agriculture right at the edge of that city, sort of contain the brick production, imagine maybe new materials being used for construction in these settlements. We have a lot of informal settlements all along the rivers and all along the edge of these fields. We're looking at that too. And this is really the mission of the Future Cities Laboratory, I think. It's really being able to transfer and to develop some of the knowledge fields and the methods that we've developed in Switzerland over. So in a way, the engagement platform that we're talking about, and ironically, the map that they gave me doesn't even feature Madagascar, I'm sorry, but it's showing where these different groups researching within the Future City Laboratory are operating. So we have people operating in China, in India. We have people also working in Greece, etc. And I think what's really important to understand is that the mission, in a way, would be ideally in the coming years to probably create a 3rd Future Cities Laboratory somewhere in the equatorial regions of the world, because the problems are really very, very specific there. This is the sort of governing board of the Future Cities Laboratory. Sasha Mentz couldn't be there here today in the conference. That's why I'm sitting in for him. His co-director is Christophe Holscher in Zurich and Thomas Schröpfer in Singapore at SUTD, and the team below it with Tanvi Maheshwari, Nicolo Gariento, Eva Mu, and Eric Hagan, who are all really lending hand to this program. That's the end of my presentation, and I'm now open for questions.
Thank you very much, Christophe. Well, that was efficiency defined. So we have a good amount of time for exchanges. Are there any questions offhand, points of clarification, or more difficult questions to make our guests work a little bit? So I'll start. I have a question. Thank you both again for these two presentations. One thing that we can put in parallel between the two of them is the work on structuring themes. And we see in both cases the question of interdisciplinarity is very important. We saw that yesterday. With Li Zhang, we saw 10 themes or points, each of which are strategic and each of which convoke or sometimes I lose my English, but summon different disciplines to treat them. And we saw the same thing with Christophe GIROT. I noted 4 main divisions. Maybe there were 5. I might have missed one. And there again, we saw the interdisciplinarity being important. I'd like to know if both of you could answer the question, in the process of arriving at these two particular categorizations of the strategic themes being dealt with in your institutions, what were the debates? Was it hard to draw lines between things? Like, for example, the question of mobility, if I'm not mistaken, doesn't come up expressly. So, are there? Could you share with us a little bit of the kitchen where you were, cooking up these categorizations? What kind of debates are there, and how difficult it is to decide on how you will divide up the thematic orientations?
Shall I take the word? Is that okay,
Yes,
Lisa?
please.
If I take the word. Thank you for your question.
Sure.
Mobility was, I wouldn't say mobility is absent. I think mobility is at the core of most of the studies. In Singapore, for instance, the Future Cities Laboratory, one of the most successful approaches was by our traffic engineer, Professor Kai Axhausen, the MAT-SIM modeling, which was an agent-based modeling where literally every single car could be monitored and followed through Singapore at any minute of the day. So there's been a lot of research on that and how to render mobility more efficient, etc. I think that it really depends on the countries. Again, I was in Madagascar 3 weeks ago, and I was wondering why all the people were walking so fast across the city. Well, the fact they were walking so fast across the city is not because they were scared. It's simply because there are no buses, right? And it takes people sometimes 2 to 3 hours to get to work. So it's all relative to where we're working, what we're talking about. It's one thing to work on a super efficient mobility system for Singapore with actually sort of toll system, sort of computerized toll system. You get the bill at the end of the month. They track wherever you've been, as compared to Madagascar, where most of the cars date from before the 1980s and are very rare, and the roads are very difficult to drive on. So I'm just using these two extremes simply to say your mobility question definitely applies, just depends on the context, and I think that at least in the case that I was showing you with Madagascar, the priority is obviously food. I don't know if you know, there's been a famine. Kids have been dying like flies in the southern tip of Madagascar right now because of a 3-year drought due to climate change. It's been considered one of the first climate change victims of Madagascar. So, I think it's a question of the order of priorities too. So I'm answering your question sideways. It's not. I don't think it would really make sense to bring mobility as a sort of top feature. For instance, in the project that we're working on in Tananarivo. It doesn't mean that it's not important. It just means it wouldn't be really relevant to the topic.
Well, I would second Christopher's point that probably today you give what priority to what topic is no longer from a traditional kind of disciplinary organizational structure. The question of mobility, apparently, and there are a plethora of disciplines and fields of working on the issue of mobility, and each give them a different priority. For example, and it might be carbon neutral mobility, it might be more efficient mobility, faster. It can also be about health. And interestingly, there are people studying currently in China about the movement of people, slow movement of people. How can this improve the health of the general population, in particular, after the pandemic? So what we are seeing here, at least in our university used to be a very conservative, comprehensive, kind of old-fashioned, engineering-heavy kind of universities. Everything is basically being defined by how it worked in the society and in the entire production process, social production process. But currently, all these boundaries between the disciplines are dissolving to such a degree that we are no longer able to even try to define vaguely a boundary. So we have reached to a consensus. We should follow the new hint of an emerging, probably new lifestyle. And therefore, we might be meeting an overhaul of the entire architecture discipline, related discipline at the moment. But since we are within this process, we can't see what it would take shape. So the only way to do is to adapt and to wait for self-organization to emerge. Thank you.
I have a question, if possible, moderator.
Yes, please go ahead.
Oh, thank you. My name is Salim Al-Wazani, Bowling Green State University in Ohio. The question is for Professor Zhang. I am looking into your model. Actually, the graph, it's very simple, straightforward. And I followed with interest the way you really put those 10 questions at different places there. The question is about the two axes. One is the micro, and the other one is production and consumption. I'm just wondering, I am sure you have very good reasons to establish those two axes. Could you please explain how did you come about, what kind of research you did in order to frame your 10 questions within those two aspects per se?
Thank you, Salim, for this question. It's a very important one. And working on a map is always difficult, and drawing any kind of map is taking a risk of being ill representing the truth, of course. So we have taken the risk, and is basically, and the scale is what traditional architecture always work with. So that access shouldn't be off any question. So the question is production and consumption. We have been trying to work on different alternatives, but then we somehow focused on this supply demand or production and consumption kind of identification is that it's very much based on what is the current process in China, because currently in China, what you do in research are expected to somehow being transferred to industry, and then somehow in a cycle of 3 or 4 years or even shorter time sooner, it is weighted to have some real world change in real life, because we have been used or spoiled by this kind of speed of development, and put it, maybe it's not a good thing at all, but at least at now here, we are facing that. So this kind of production and consumption fits into that model very well, and that's why we are using it. And it makes easier for our professors to spot themselves a special location inside this map and to have their own strategic plans made. Thank you.
If I may just follow on what you said, Professor Zhang, when I looked at this to begin with, I thought your mind, your frame of work, your frame of thought was about a sustainable way of thinking. Is this actually, does it, yeah, I understand where this came from, because that's how things developed in China, and the production consumption, the idea of research has to do to translate into some sort of industrial output. But do you see that paradigm, which you borrowed from what is happening in China, fit into the general framework of the idea of sustainability? Is that something you thought about, or you felt comfortable going with your model because also it is sustainable? I don't want to put words in your mouth, because it is also sustainable.
Well, I have to admit, this is a very important question. Actually, I'm pretty schizophrenic on this one, because on one hand, surely if you focus on the real world change, you would bring some change. If you are aimed at more sustainable, more ecological, environmentally friendly interventions, and probably you will achieve at least some. But then there's always this very subjective, introvert kind of human value system. You don't need to wait for an objective change. If you change your value system, probably it will make bigger changes in society, more fundamental changes. Yeah. So currently, the map I have just shown is what we have in the more objective kind of field, but less subjective. But architecture is always about both, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more questions from our guests at home, or away, far away, or in the room, in the conference room?
Could somebody ask the two speakers? I have a question for Christopher, if possible.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, Christopher, I think it's intriguing what you really mentioned about Madagascar. It is interesting to see that a country of this size and population size also does not have a school of architecture. Could you help us a little bit understand? A situation like this is a little bit strange. And what kind of things being happening from within the country or from people from outside, maybe UNESCO or what have you there, since you seem to be familiar with that part of the world. Since this is actually, the whole conference is related to education, this looks like it really relates to the theme of this conference, if all possible.
That's a very political question. I mean, I wouldn't dare venture into Malagasy politics. It's not my role here. All I'm saying is, I think our role is to contribute to this country. These young people are well trained. They may not have, as I said, a laptop, but they're very rigorously trained in this engineering school. And it could be the first stepping stone to creating a school of the environment and architecture thereafter. We're just dealing with archaic structures and habits. I mean, I have to say very humbly, landscape architecture. I mean, I know Tsinghua has had, for instance, landscape garden and landscape architecture for quite a while. In Switzerland didn't have landscape architecture until 20 years ago. I mean, my predecessor, Dieter Kinas, founded it, and we've been pushing it into a program just now. So I don't want to be condescending. What I'm saying is that the the situation is such that we have a foot in the door. We're working with the engineering school and the agricultural school there. They're very eager. You know, I spent 2 weeks with them. The people are so thirsty for knowledge and contact. You know, I don't know if you realize, I mean, I took a plane there. There are 3 airplanes a week landing in Madagascar. You know, you arrive in the airport, there's only 1 plane. I mean, it's just these scales of reality, of economic reality, of political reality that are so different. So it's not that I'm trying to play a world saver role here. I'm just saying we have knowledge and methodologies. We've been able to design in point cloud, in LiDAR mode, we can analyze and design. You know, we now with 3D modeling, you can transfer those into point clouds. You can work on earth cubatures. You can work on simulations of floods, et cetera, and we want to transfer all these methods over. I think that it's our responsibility to do that. So whether it's then called a school of architecture or a school of engineering or a school of gardening, to me is secondary to the fact that we're really transferring a specific knowledge base. And what I found very interesting in this whole thing is the LiDAR data, which is sometimes incredibly difficult to obtain. Like it took us 1.5 years to get it in Singapore. It took us 3 years when we worked in Jakarta. Yeah? In Madagascar, the government authorities gave us the latest LiDAR data within 2 months. You know, so there's a willingness. You know, that's all I'm trying to say. I mean, I can't answer your question that specifically because I don't know exactly what to say.
Thank you.
So I just want to, we have some questions. Yes, Tatiana Schneider has a question. Would you mind, with the microphone, yeah.
Okay, I'm trying, can you hear me in the virtual space? Yeah, okay. So it's been, you talked about major ecological crises, no? And they're big. And at the same time, I try to keep the question short. No? I think it is about universities and engaging with these kind of, with places in general, whether they're in distant parts of the world or not, it doesn't really matter. And I have the feeling that for the past 50 years, the kind of practice, that the tools might have changed, but the practice has not really changed. And I wonder, because we're running out of time, you could say, whether you could maybe speak about sort of the mechanisms or maybe the tools or the instruments that you see maybe best placed to maybe scale up efforts also to address these crises that we're facing.
Would either of you like to answer that question?
Yeah, sorry, this is for the speakers, no?
Yeah.
Yeah? Sorry, for them?
Yes, for them.
Yeah, okay. What do you want me to do?
No, it's fine. I'm telling them.
Okay.
I don't know.
No, it was for you, no? So it was, sorry. It was not a general comment, but really a question to the ETH and to Tsinghua as well, to maybe talk from your perspectives about tools and instruments that might have an impact after all. No? So going out of the maybe small-scale sort of engagements, which are good and necessary, of course, but given that I say now in inverted commas, universities have been doing that on different levels, at least since the 1960s, with South America, sort of going into India, doing other sort of working in regional alliances as well. And I have the feeling, in a way, that these projects have been going on for many, many, many years, and their scope has remained relatively unchanged. The tools of engagement have changed, so we now take sort of advanced equipment to do these kind of engagements, but the practice as such has not changed. And given climate collapse, I get the sense, and so do many others, that we have to advance and speed up and accelerate practices. And I wonder whether you have any ideas about how to better maybe link up or to connect or to network or do something else to make a major impact beyond the individual institutions maybe. Is that clear? I don't know whether I can make it any clearer.
So would either of our guest speakers like to address that question?
Well, I had a hard time hearing everything, but from what I've heard, this is an extremely general question, and I understand your anguish. You know, it's the greater syndrome. You know, we're all panicked, and I understand that fully. To say that we're inactive would be quite unfair. I mean, I'll just give you an example again, coming back to Madagascar, and then I'll move my way back into Switzerland. Madagascar has probably one of the best carbon footprints in the world. They simply don't even have money to buy petrol. So, and even plastic is recycled naturally, because when you offer an empty plastic bottle to a beggar, they take it with a smile. So what I'm saying is, it's all relative. And if you go to Madagascar, I was shocked around Madagascar and the city, they only plant eucalyptus and Douglas pine, right? For hectares, over hundreds of kilometers. And the reason why they do that is they cook with coal. And when you arrive in the city at night, there's no electricity. They just burn candles in the house, most of them. And that's the reality of the terrain. They use trees for cooking, right? It's crazy. It's a country with sunshine. You know, there would be probably a lot of solutions. They just can't afford those solutions. So what I'm saying, and I understand your anguish, we're working, for instance, you know, in Madagascar with the agricultural school and with the forestry school. They're giving us a whole list of trees that could be replanted there. But the problem that we have is, even if we do that, the trees will get cut by the people who need to cook, you know, and it actually is quite cold. It's at 1,200 meters altitude. It gets cold in these months. So what I'm trying to say is, it's of course, you know, and you're right, we're working on a smaller scale and locally, but I still really, really, really think that the global discourse is one thing, and working locally on solutions like making people more responsible locally is the first step in this whole chain. I don't see how we can approach it otherwise, right? And of course, deforestation in Madagascar is a major problem, and it should be addressed. And I think that could be done in parallel, you know, if the partnerships evolve. Then coming back to Switzerland, you know, of course, our carbon footprint, we buy carbon points from other countries. Switzerland's carbon footprint is terrible, and we're just buying, you know, carbon points from other countries. If we could already look at each country individually and weigh the environmental responsibility of each country and intervene there, and it would be probably very uncomfortable for both you and me. You know, what I'm saying is, if we're really going to act responsibly, then we should act locally. You know, I mean, maybe it's an old Berkeley line I'm coming out with here, but I really believe in this notion of local action. Not just global discourse. So I don't have a solution to your question. What I'm saying, though, is we have a lot of engineers working on material culture, on recycling. We even have conferences saying we should stop building and we should only use existing buildings ecologically. We should, instead of buying brand new electric cars with these cadmium batteries and all that stuff, we should simply recycle old cars and maybe run them on hydrogen. I mean, if we're going to be really ecological, we should look through the whole consumption. You know, basically what Zhang was saying, we should look at the whole patterns that we've inherited for the last 50 years and question them locally. You know, that would be my answer. Now, you know, we can only do so much as a school. What I'm saying is, if we can make the younger generations aware, responsible, and give them solution, I don't think it's enough just informing and panicking people about imminent disaster. We should be training people on active solutions and on action. That's the only thing I can say. So for Madagascar, our contribution to your question would be, yes, we should get rid of the eucalyptus and the Douglas pines and maybe plant, you know, there were like 300 local species of trees that have disappeared. We should probably start bringing them back in again. But it's all linked to a macroeconomic situation there that is extremely difficult, you know.
Well, I totally agree with what Christopher has just said. Um, this kind of global coordination issue is always more ethical, is always putting things more political. And when you put things more political, it always has the potential of being divisive. Um, um, Thinking from my own experience, when I worked on a small project in the remote mountains of Tibet about 10 years or 12 years ago, I went there and with this concept in my mind that I'm going to change the local people there. And then I ended up actually after this project being changed myself. So I really do think any kind of global coordination would start with based upon a global understanding of people's diversity. And architecture probably is always trying to span across this two extremes. One extreme is the coordination, synchronization, and the other is always this very individual and very local community oriented kind of value systems. And if we can bridge across these two extremes, probably we can find better ways of trying to find a new way of coordination.
Thank you. Are there any more questions or comments?
Hossein Adiwan, I'm an architect and associate professor here in the Architecture and Landscape School of Bordeaux. I don't know if it's a question or just a contribution, but I was listening to you, especially when you were talking about the experience with the ETH and the work and research you're doing in Madagascar. You referred to acting at the local scale and these global phenomena that have implications locally, and to try and act locally and probably also at a global scale. I was just wondering if I fully understand the creation of knowledge and the transfer of knowledge between Switzerland and Madagascar. I was just wondering to what degree locally in Madagascar there is a kind of mediation of this knowledge to local communities. If we consider that at the end of the chain, they are the people who live there, they're the people who through their everyday life will maintain and sustain the environment you're working on, and that engaging local communities on issues such as the ones you're working on, and at the same time probably being able to make an economical livelihood out of that. Do you think, are these things that you have been able to work on, engaging with local communities and associating them in the processes that you want to implement? What I'm trying to say is, have you thought of ways of getting this also not only in the hands of people who have knowledge and know-hows, but making it reachable to local communities that become actors and probably empowers them?
Thank you. This is a very good question. I mean, I just wanted to clarify something. The local students that we're going to exchange with don't have that knowledge yet, right? They have zero knowledge on LiDAR methods and modeling. So that's the first step. I mean, I think that it's a bit like in an airplane. You know, we need to give the oxygen to the local people. So it's the local students. They're obviously privileged compared to a lot of other people. As I said, in the neighborhoods we're working in, there's a lot of, it's mostly all informal settlements. They're living on the dikes. I didn't show the social aspect, but it's an important one. We have in our group sociologists working with the local communities, with some also local students doing interviews, etc. The real problem deep down, if we're going to go into an action plan, is the whole land ownership patterns that are very, very complicated there. The land is not necessarily owned by the people that work it or that live next to it. it makes the whole decision process extremely complex. As you know, we're dealing with sort of layered methods. So yes, I mean, we're acting clearly within that context. The idea is we're bringing also Swiss students this autumn to Madagascar to meet the students and actually go on the terrain and meet the communities. We already had a meeting a month ago with all the local authorities, entities, whether it's the forestry department, the agricultural department, the Department of Urban Design for the city of Tananarive, infrastructure engineers, private developers, foreign investors, etc., etc. So we have that whole list of stakeholders. The main problem that we have there is you have to understand that we're dealing with really with a culture of poverty, and a lot of the people living on those very precarious dikes, levees along the river, etc., don't really have necessarily, I mean, they have an idea, but they don't even believe in this notion of accessing to knowledge or to perfecting things. So that's going to be a delicate process. The project is going on for another 3 years, but I have to say the local involvement is already part of the agenda. We couldn't work otherwise. It's a very top-down political system there. I don't want to go into the details of that, but it's very, very much that way. It goes back to the Minara Kingdom 500 years ago. It's pre-colonial, actually, the whole hierarchy and racial system that's in Madagascar that's very difficult to work with. So what I'm saying is, yes, we're coming in, but in a way, this sort of grassroots or bottom-up approach that we have here, let's say in Europe, is already a sort of worldview that is not shared by all the countries in the world. And when we arrive there with that lens, it distorts things, right? So we're going peu à peu, we're going step by step into the dialogue with the local authorities, with the people. We met farmers, we saw them work the land, we asked them how they were getting their cash. I mean, we're starting to understand that whole system. And our goal is really to be as respectful as possible and as hopeful as possible for the local population. I can't say more than that.
Thank you. Okay. I propose to conclude. I have just a couple of an observation conclusion, just to basing on the diagram, the great diagram with the two axes showed by Li Zhang. It seems to me that design, we had the horizontal axis, which is production and consumption, or supply and demand. And design, I think we often thought about it as a way of kind of closing that. Design is to close that gap, to put the built environment, the human settlements in adequation with lifestyles. We could look at it like that, I think. The challenge today, and it's already been 50 years or more, but the challenge that's really today coming to the fore is that it's no longer just about closing that gap between what's available for our lifestyles. It's about moving that center point somewhere else where we consume less. And that's in the interest of the upper part of the diagram, which is the macro environment, the wilderness, the climate, the ecosystems. And I think the problem is that has obviously an effect on the micro level, our bodies, our comfort, what we're used to having. And I think what I'm realizing, thanks to this session, is that shift, moving that point where design intervenes somewhere else, that shift is not just a design problem, it's a political problem. And I think it's become clear in these exchanges that that's the case. So thank you very much to our guests for their presentations about their excellent schools. I think it gives us a lot of food for thought. And I wish good luck to everyone as we go into the lunch break. I wish you good luck with this not only design problem, but this political problem that we are all facing in our own ways. Thank you very much.